You think you know Christmas cookies? Think again. Long before slice and bake tubes and ready-made dough, grandmothers across America filled their kitchens with cookies so extraordinary they've been lost to time. Let's dig into 30 old-fashioned Christmas cookies that have faded into history. Pfeffernüsse were the tiny German spice bombs that packed more flavor into one bite than most modern cookies contain in an entire batch. These small, round cookies combined black pepper, anise, cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom into dough enriched with molasses and honey, creating complexity that seemed almost medicinal at first taste, but became deeply addictive. Grandmothers rolled the baked cookies in powdered sugar while still warm, creating a snowy coating that softened into a sweet glaze as the cookies rested in tins. The flavor improved dramatically over several weeks, making Pfeffernüsse the cookies you baked in early December and hid until Christmas Eve. German immigrant families guarded their specific spice ratios jealously, each household's version distinctly their own. Children often found the peppery bite startling at first, but grew to crave it as the taste of Christmas itself. These cookies represented centuries of European baking tradition carried across oceans and preserved in American kitchens. Springerle were the carved cookie masterpieces that turned simple dough into edible art, pressed with wooden molds passed down through generations. The dough itself was deceptively simple: eggs, sugar, flour, and anise flavoring, but the technique required patience that modern bakers rarely possess. Grandmothers pressed intricately carved wooden molds into rolled dough, creating raised designs of flowers, animals, and nativity scenes that emerged from the oven looking like ivory cameos. The cookies were left to dry overnight before baking, developing a hard shell that preserved detailed impressions while the interior stayed soft. Anise oil gave them a distinctive licorice flavor that divided families into passionate lovers and determined avoiders. The wooden molds themselves were treasures, some dating back centuries in German families who brought them to America in steamer trunks. Springerle connected Christmas tables to medieval European traditions when sugar was precious, and decorated cookies were gifts worthy of royalty. Sand tarts were the paper-thin butter cookies that shattered at first bite into buttery shards dusted with cinnamon sugar and topped with almond halves. Pennsylvania Dutch grandmothers rolled the dough impossibly thin, translucent in places, then cut rounds that baked into crisp, delicate wafers. The cookies were brushed with egg white, sprinkled with cinnamon sugar, and crowned with a single blanched almond pressed into the center before baking. The result was a cookie so fragile it seemed to dissolve on the tongue, leaving behind pure butter flavor and warm spice. Making sand tarts required cold hands, a light touch, and the patience to roll dough thin enough to read through without tearing. Families measured success by how many cookies they could cut from a single batch. The thinner the rolling, the more impressive the yield. Children were often banned from the kitchen during sand tart making because the slightest bump could ruin an entire sheet of carefully rolled dough. Lebuken were the German gingerbread cookies that arrived in America already ancient, their recipes stretching back to medieval monasteries where monks baked them as sacred offerings. Unlike American gingerbread, Lebuken contained no molasses but relied instead on honey aged for months, ground nuts, candied citrus peel, and a blend of spices that varied by region. The dough was mixed weeks before baking and left to ripen in cool cellars, developing flavors that freshly made dough couldn't match. Grandmothers baked Lebuken on edible wafer papers called oblaten, creating cookies with crisp bottoms and soft, almost cakey tops. The finished cookies were glazed with sugar icing or dipped in chocolate, then stored in tins where they softened into chewy perfection. Lebuken appeared at Christmas markets throughout Germany for centuries, before immigrant families brought recipes to Pennsylvania and Ohio. The cookies carried history in every bite, connecting American children to traditions older than their country. Crybabies were the soft molasses cookies that earned their peculiar name from the way their crinkled tops resembled tearful faces fresh from the oven. Grandmothers mixed dark molasses with brown sugar, lard, and warm spices into dough that spread during baking, creating cookies with crispy edges and soft, almost underdone centers. The tops crackled dramatically as they cooled, forming patterns that imaginative children saw as crying faces. Unlike crisp ginger snaps, crybabies stayed soft for weeks stored in tins, their texture improving as flavors melded together. The cookies were everyday treats rather than fancy Christmas specialties, but they appeared on holiday cookie plates because their dark color and intense flavor contrasted beautifully with lighter, more delicate offerings. Rural families appreciated crybabies because the recipe tolerated substitutions, whatever fat was available, whatever molasses sat in the pantry. The name itself spoke to practical humor, finding personality in simple baked goods. Fatigman were the Scandinavian fried cookies twisted into delicate knots that Norwegian and Swedish grandmothers made only at Christmas, their name translating to poor man's cookies, despite requiring considerable skill. The dough was enriched with egg yolks, cream, and cardamom, then rolled thin and cut into diamonds with a slit in the center, through which one end was pulled to create the signature twisted shape. Each cookie was fried in hot lard until golden and puffed, then drained and dusted with powdered sugar while still warm. The texture was impossibly light and crisp, shattering into buttery fragments at first bite. Making fatigman was a Christmas Eve tradition in Scandinavian American homes, with the whole family taking turns at the frying pot. Children learned the twisting technique from their mothers, who learned from their mothers, the knowledge passing through generations. Despite their humble name, fatigman required expensive ingredients and considerable time, making them treasures reserved for celebration. Berliner kranser were the Norwegian wreath-shaped butter cookies that required 3 risings and precise technique to achieve rings so tender they practically melted before you could chew. Grandmothers creamed butter with sugar and hard-cooked egg yolks, a secret ingredient that created unmatched tenderness, then shaped ropes of dough into wreaths with overlapping ends. The cookies were dipped in beaten egg white and coated with crushed sugar cubes that sparkled like ice crystals after baking. The texture was sandy and short, crumbling on the tongue in a way that modern cookies rarely achieve. Each batch required hours of careful work, from cooking and sieving egg yolks to crushing sugar cubes with rolling pins wrapped in clean towels. Norwegian American families served Berliner kranser alongside fatigman and other traditional cookies, creating holiday spreads that honored the old country while celebrating their new home. The wreath shape symbolized eternity and the circular nature of the Christmas season. Kringla were the figure-8 Scandinavian cookies that look simple but required dough handling skills passed from grandmother to granddaughter over decades of Christmas baking. The dough combined sour cream, sugar, eggs, and flour into a mixture that had to be chilled, rolled, and shaped quickly before it became too soft to handle. Each piece was rolled into a rope and twisted into a pretzel-like figure-8, then baked until barely golden. Overbaking ruined their signature tender texture. The flavor was subtle, slightly tangy from the sour cream, sweet but not cloying, with a hint of cardamom depending on family tradition. Kringla kept well in tins, making them practical for holiday baking done weeks in advance. Scandinavian American communities held kringla in special regard, with church bake sales featuring the twisted cookies prominently. The shape itself required practice, too thick, and the cookies were doughy, too thin, and they broke during shaping. Mastering kringla meant earning your place among the family's serious bakers. Cinnamon stars cut from ground almond dough and glazed with meringue brought German Christmas elegance to American holiday tables through recipes carried in immigrant memories. Grandmothers beat egg whites with sugar until stiff, reserved a portion for glazing, then folded the remainder into ground almonds and cinnamon to create dough that was sticky, temperamental, and absolutely worth the trouble. The dough was rolled between sheets of powdered sugar-dusted waxed paper, cut into stars, and topped with the reserved meringue that baked into a crisp, glossy shell. The cookies were chewy beneath their crackled white coating, intensely almond-flavored with cinnamon warmth throughout. Making Zimstern required understanding how humidity affected meringue, how to handle sticky dough without adding flour that would toughen the texture, and how to judge when the white topping was set without overbaking the almond base. The finished cookies looked like snow-covered stars, beautiful enough for the fanciest cookie exchanges. Maple sugar cookies emerged from New England kitchens where grandmothers substituted locally produced maple sugar for expensive white sugar imported from distant refineries. The cookies carried distinctive caramel notes that plain sugar couldn't provide, their flavor unmistakably tied to the maple groves of Vermont, New Hampshire, and upstate New York. Grandmothers creamed maple sugar with butter, often locally produced, creating dough that spread more than white sugar versions and developed crispy, almost lacy edges during baking. The cookies were cut into simple shapes and left undecorated, their amber color and complex sweetness needing no embellishment. Some families pressed forked tines into the tops or stamped them with butter molds carved with farm scenes. Maple sugar cookies represented regional identity baked into Christmas tradition, a way of celebrating what the land provided rather than what money could buy. The cookies connected holiday tables to spring sugaring and the cycle of seasons that shaped New England life. Sandbakkels were the delicate Norwegian almond cookies pressed into tiny fluted tins that required patience, skill, and molds accumulated over generations. Grandmothers pressed buttery almond dough into small tart-shaped tins, creating cookies so thin the metal showed through in places, then baked them until barely golden before carefully tapping each one free. The cookies were impossibly fragile, crumbling at a touch, with a sandy, melt-in-your-mouth texture that justified their name. Each household's collection of sandbakkel tins told a story, some inherited from great-grandmothers, others purchased at Scandinavian import shops that once dotted the upper Midwest. Making sandbakkels was a Christmas Eve ritual. The tins lined up by the hundreds as women pressed dough and children stacked the cooled shells. The flavor was subtle, butter, almond, and a whisper of vanilla, but the texture was unforgettable. These cookies represented the patience and precision that defined old-world baking, a tradition that faded as time became scarce. Anise drops were the licorice-scented cookies that grandmothers piped onto baking sheets and left overnight to develop the characteristic foot, a ruffled base that formed as the tops dried and the bottoms stayed soft during baking. The batter was simple: eggs beaten with sugar until thick, flour folded in, anise oil added for its distinctive flavor. But the technique required understanding that couldn't be rushed. Piped through pastry bags into small rounds, the cookies sat uncovered overnight while their surfaces dried into shells that held their shape in the oven while the interiors puffed. The finished cookies had glossy domed tops, soft chewy centers, and that ruffled foot that proved you'd done it right. German and Italian grandmothers both claimed these cookies, each tradition adding slight variations. Children either loved or hated the strong anise flavor, but those who loved it craved these cookies every December. The overnight drying made anise drops impractical for modern bakers wanting instant results. Butterhorns were the crescent-shaped cookies made from yeast dough layered with butter, creating flaky pastries that straddled the line between cookie and bread. Grandmothers worked cold butter into flour and yeast, then rolled and folded the dough repeatedly to create layers that puffed and separated during baking. Each crescent was rolled from a triangle of dough curved into a horn shape and brushed with egg wash that baked into a glossy golden finish. The texture was unlike any other Christmas cookie, tender, flaky, slightly chewy from the yeast, and the flavor was pure butter with hints of vanilla. Making butterhorns required multiple risings and careful temperature control, keeping the dough cold enough that butter didn't melt but warm enough for yeast to work. Families often filled their horns with jam, nuts, or poppy seed paste, creating signature variations. The time investment, often spanning 2 days, meant butterhorns appeared only at Christmas when effort felt justified. Brown edge wafers were the impossibly thin butter cookies that spread into lacy rounds with caramelized edges that shattered between teeth like sweet glass. Grandmothers dropped small spoonfuls of batter onto baking sheets, knowing each would spread into paper-thin circles with holes like delicate lacework. The high butter and sugar content meant the cookies caramelized at the edges while staying pale in the centers, creating rings of deep golden brown surrounding ivory middles. Fresh from the oven, the wafers were pliable enough to shape into cigarettes or cones, but most families left them flat, stacking them carefully between sheets of waxed paper. The flavor was pure caramelized butter and sugar, simple yet sophisticated, adult in its restraint. These cookies required precise oven temperature and timing. Seconds too long meant burnt edges, Seconds too short meant chewy centers that wouldn't crisp. Brown edge wafers proved that the simplest recipes often demanded the most skill, rewarding experienced bakers while humbling beginners. Date pinwheels combined two preparations: tender cookie dough and thick date filling into spiraled slices that looked like they came from professional bakeries despite being made in home kitchens. Grandmothers cooked chopped dates with sugar and water until the mixture became thick paste, then spread this filling over rolled cookie dough before rolling everything into tight logs. The logs were chilled until firm, then sliced into rounds that revealed perfect spirals of pale dough and dark filling. Each cookie offered contrasting textures: crisp, buttery outside, chewy, sweet inside, and flavors that complemented perfectly. The preparation took hours, from cooking the filling to chilling the logs, but the impressive results made the effort worthwhile. Date pinwheels appeared on Christmas cookie plates as proof of a baker's skill and patience, their perfect spirals announcing that someone had taken real time and care. The cookies kept well in tins, their flavors mellowing and improving over the days between baking and eating. Hickory nut cookies celebrated the wild nuts that rural families gathered each autumn, their distinctive flavor impossible to replicate with store-bought alternatives. Grandmothers cracked hickory nuts by hand, a tedious process that occupied entire evenings, extracting meat that tasted richer and more complex than any cultivated walnut. The nuts were folded into butter cookie dough or pressed onto tops before baking, their oils releasing during cooking to perfume entire kitchens. Hickory nuts were sweeter than walnuts, with a butterscotch undertone that made cookies taste almost candied without extra sugar. Gathering and cracking the nuts was family work, with children competing to extract the largest pieces while adults told stories. The cookies themselves were simple. The nuts were the star, but they connected Christmas tables to autumn forests and the patient work of harvesting what nature provided. As families moved to cities and lost access to hickory groves, these cookies became memories rather than traditions. Molasses crinkles were the soft spice cookies that emerged from ovens with dramatically crackled tops coated in sparkling sugar, their dark interiors hiding beneath sweet crystalline shells. Grandmothers rolled balls of molasses dark dough in granulated sugar before baking, creating cookies that spread and cracked as they rose, the sugar coating breaking into beautiful patterns. The texture was soft and chewy, almost underdone in the center, with edges that crisped slightly where they met the baking sheet. The flavor was deeply spiced: ginger, cinnamon, cloves, mellowed by molasses that provided both sweetness and a slight bitter edge. Molasses crinkles were the democratic Christmas cookie, requiring no special equipment or rare ingredients, tolerating substitutions that made each family's version unique. Children could help roll the dough balls in sugar, making these cookies a gateway to Christmas baking traditions. The crackled tops made each cookie a small artwork, no two patterns exactly alike. Pecan tassies were the tiny pecan pies baked in miniature muffin tins, their cream cheese crusts cradling sweet pecan, filling in bite-sized portions perfect for holiday gatherings. Grandmothers pressed cream cheese pastry into tiny tins, each one requiring individual attention, then filled them with mixtures of pecans, brown sugar, butter, and eggs that baked into gooey perfection. The crusts stayed tender and flaky, while the filling set into something between pecan pie and praline, each tassie a complete dessert in 2 bites. Making pecan tassies required steady hands and patience, pressing dozens of tiny crusts while filling waited nearby. The cookies were Southern in origin but spread throughout America as families shared recipes at church gatherings and neighborhood exchanges. Pecan tassies represented hospitality, the willingness to spend hours creating bite-sized treats that guests consumed in moments. Their disappearance from modern cookie plates reflects how few bakers now have time for such traditions. Spritz cookies, pressed through cookie guns into festive shapes, were the Christmas cookies that every mid-century household attempted, their buttery dough requiring precise consistency to hold designs. Grandmothers loaded soft dough into metal presses fitted with decorative discs, squeezing out wreaths, trees, stars, and camels that held their shapes through baking. The dough had to be exactly right, too cold, and it wouldn't press smoothly. Too warm, and shapes would blur. Successful spritz were crisp and buttery, their pressed patterns sharp and distinct, often decorated with colored sugar or candied cherry halves. The cookie press itself was often a wedding gift, used annually and stored carefully between Christmases. Children loved watching dough emerge in shapes, though operating the press required adult strength. Spritz represented mid-century optimism about kitchen gadgets, the belief that the right tool could make anyone a master baker. Their decline mirrors our loss of faith in such mechanical promises. Kurabiades were the Greek butter cookies buried in powdered sugar so thick they resembled snowballs, their interiors studded with almonds and scented with brandy or rose water. Grandmothers beat butter until impossibly light and fluffy, sometimes for 30 minutes by hand, creating cookies so tender they threatened to crumble before reaching your mouth. Each cookie was shaped by hand, often with a clove pressed into the top for both flavor and decoration, then baked until barely colored. Still warm from the oven, the cookies were buried in clouds of powdered sugar that clung to their surfaces and drifted onto everything nearby. The flavor was subtle, butter, almond, a whisper of brandy, but the texture was remarkable, dissolving on the tongue like sweet clouds. Greek-American families served kurabiades at Christmas and New Year's celebrations, their snow-white appearance symbolizing purity and fresh beginnings. The powdered sugar coating made them impractical for cookie exchanges, but irresistible at home. Rosettes were the Scandinavian fried cookies shaped like snowflakes and flowers using special iron molds that grandmothers heated in hot oil before dipping into thin batter. The technique required precise timing. The iron had to be hot enough to cook the batter instantly, but not so hot that it burned before the cookie set. Each rosette emerged lacy and impossibly delicate, its intricate pattern preserved in crisp golden pastry that shattered at first bite. The batter was simple: eggs, milk, flour, and a touch of sugar. But the skill needed to produce perfect rosettes took years to develop. Grandmothers worked in assembly line fashion during Christmas season, dipping and frying dozens of rosettes that accumulated on paper-lined trays dusted with powdered sugar. The irons themselves were treasured tools, often imported from Scandinavia and passed from mother to daughter. Rosettes appeared on holiday cookie plates as proof of a baker's mastery, their fragile beauty announcing considerable time and care. Bourbon balls were the no-bake confections that Southern grandmothers assembled in December, their boozy interiors mellowing in tins until Christmas Day arrived. Crushed vanilla wafers were mixed with finely chopped pecans, powdered sugar, corn syrup, and enough bourbon to make the mixture hold together when rolled into balls. The cookies were then rolled in powdered sugar or dipped in chocolate, creating confections straddling the line between cookie and candy. The bourbon flavor was unmistakable, but not overpowering, warming the throat and leaving a pleasant glow adults appreciated. Children were sometimes given bourbon balls with the promise that the alcohol had cooked off, though everyone knew that wasn't quite true. Making bourbon balls was often a social event, with women gathering in kitchens to roll and coat while sharing gossip. The cookies kept for weeks in cool places, their flavors deepening as bourbon mellowed into the crumb mixture. Raisin-filled cookies were the old-fashioned sandwich cookies that grandmothers assembled from 2 rounds of sugar cookie dough encasing thick, spiced raisin filling cooked on the stovetop. The filling required patience. Raisins simmered with sugar, water, and warm spices until they broke down into jammy paste that spread smoothly without running during baking. Each cookie was assembled by hand, the top round pressed onto the filled bottom, edges crimped with fork tines to seal the sweet filling inside. The result was substantial and satisfying, more like a hand pie than a delicate cookie, perfect for lunch pails and afternoon snacks. Grandmothers made these in huge batches because they kept well and traveled without breaking, ideal for mailing to distant relatives or giving as gifts. The cookies represented a time when Christmas baking meant creating things that would last through the entire holiday season. Nut horns were the crescent-shaped pastries made from cream cheese dough wrapped around sweet walnut filling, their flaky layers revealing the patience required to produce them. Grandmothers combined cream cheese with butter and flour, then chilled the dough until firm enough to roll. The filling mixed ground walnuts with sugar, egg whites, and vanilla into paste that held together during baking. Small triangles of dough were spread with filling, rolled from the wide end toward the point, and curved into crescents. The baked horns emerged golden and flaky, their cream cheese dough more tender than standard pastry, with sweet filling visible at the spiral centers. Eastern European immigrant families brought nut horn recipes to America, where they became Christmas traditions in Polish, Hungarian, and Czech communities throughout the Midwest. The cookies required multiple chilling periods and careful handling, limiting them to serious bakers. Pizzelles were the Italian waffle cookies pressed in special irons that grandmothers heated over stove burners, creating thin rounds embossed with patterns dating back centuries. The batter combined eggs, sugar, butter, flour, and anise into mixture that spread perfectly when spooned onto hot irons. Each pizzelle emerged paper-thin with lacy patterns on both sides, crisp and fragrant with the distinctive licorice scent of anise. Italian-American families made pizzelles by the hundreds during Christmas, the irons clicking rhythmically as grandmother after grandmother pressed the thin wafers. Some shaped warm pizzelles into cones while still pliable, creating vessels for whipped cream or cannoli filling. The irons themselves were wedding gifts passed through generations, their patterns worn smooth from decades of use. Pizzelles represented Italian Christmas traditions transplanted to American kitchens alongside Northern European specialties. Black walnut cookies showcased the intensely flavored wild nuts that rural families gathered from trees growing in fence rows and woodlots across the Midwest and Appalachia. Black walnuts tasted nothing like English walnuts. Stronger, earthier, almost musky, and grandmothers created cookies with flavor that store-bought nuts couldn't approach. The nuts were notoriously difficult to crack, shells staining hands, but the extracted meat rewarded effort with richness. Folded into brown sugar cookie dough, black walnuts released their oils during baking, perfuming kitchens with aroma that announced Christmas. Families with access to black walnut trees gathered nuts each autumn for holiday baking. The cookies connected Christmas tables to specific places, particular trees, and remembered harvests. As families moved away from rural areas, black walnut cookies became treasured memories of places left behind. Sour cream cookies were the tender, cakey rounds that Midwestern grandmothers frosted with colored icing, their soft texture unlike crisp cookies dominating other regional traditions. The dough incorporated sour cream that kept cookies moist for days after baking, their surfaces perfect for decorative icing that made them look festive for the holidays. Grandmothers cut dough into stars, bells, trees, and angels, baking until barely set. Overbaking ruined the characteristic softness that made these special. After cooling, each cookie was frosted by hand with icing tinted red, green, or white, sometimes decorated with colored sugar or silver dragées. The cookies were substantial enough to satisfy, but celebratory enough for church exchanges and neighborhood gift plates. Sour cream cookies represented farm wife ingenuity, transforming everyday dairy into Christmas treats children remembered for decades. Russian tea cakes went by many names: Mexican wedding cookies, snowballs, butterballs, but grandmothers everywhere recognized these powdered sugar-coated nut cookies as essential Christmas offerings. The dough combined butter, sugar, flour, vanilla, and finely chopped pecans or walnuts, but coating them twice in powdered sugar created their signature snowy appearance. Warm cookies received their first coating that partially melted into sweet glaze. Then a second after cooling created the thick shell that made them irresistible. The texture was sandy and tender, crumbling on the tongue before you could chew, releasing bursts of buttery nut flavor with each dissolving bite. The cookies were deceptively rich, 2 or 3 satisfied, even determined sweet tooths, and they kept well in tins where flavors mellowed beautifully. Russian tea cakes appeared on cookie plates across America, regardless of heritage, proof that some recipes transcend cultural boundaries. Pfefferkuchen were the thin, crisp German spice cookies that grandmothers cut into hearts, stars, and animal shapes, their edges sharp and flavor intensely aromatic. Unlike soft lebuken, Pfefferkuchen snapped cleanly when broken, surfaces sometimes glazed with sugar icing that dried to a crackled shine. The dough required aging, mixed weeks before baking and stored in cool cellars where flavors developed into something greater than individual spices could achieve. Honey provided sweetness, while pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom created the warming complexity that gave these cookies their name. Grandmothers used carved wooden molds for pfefferkuchen, creating raised designs beneath thin icing. The cookies kept for months properly stored, their flavors continuing to develop. Pfefferkuchen connected American Christmas celebrations to medieval German traditions when spiced cookies were precious gifts. Thimble cookies were the delicate butter cookies with jam-filled centers that grandmothers created by pressing actual thimbles into unbaked dough rounds to form perfect wells for filling. The technique was brilliantly simple. Rich butter cookie dough rolled into balls, pressed with a thimble to create indentations, then filled with jewel-bright jam that bubbled and set during baking. Cookies emerged with golden edges surrounding glistening pools of red, purple, or orange jam that looked like tiny stained glass windows. Each grandmother's thimble left distinctive marks, perfectly sized for the right amount of jam. Children loved these cookies for visual appeal. Bright colors promised sweetness before the first bite confirmed it. The combination of crisp butter cookie and chewy jam provided textural contrast that elaborate cookies couldn't match. Thimble cookies proved the best recipes required nothing more than common tools used with creativity. Boiled custard served warm in cups was Christmas Eve tradition in Southern households, a drinkable dessert that bridged the gap between eggnog and pudding. Rich with eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla, the custard was cooked slowly over gentle heat until it thickened enough to coat a spoon. Families served it warm from heirloom cups, sometimes with a grating of nutmeg on top. The texture was silky and comforting, substantial enough to satisfy without the heaviness of solid desserts. Making boiled custard required patience and attention. Too much heat would scramble the eggs, ruining hours of work. Grandmothers passed down their techniques through demonstration, teaching daughters to recognize the exact moment the custard reached perfection. Some families added bourbon, transforming it into something approaching liquid luxury. The tradition faded as store-bought eggnog became convenient, and fewer cooks possessed the skill to execute proper custard. Boiled custard was more than dessert, it was ritual. Shoofly pie was a slice of Appalachian history wrapped in a layer of sticky molasses and crumb topping, a dessert born from frugality and resourcefulness. It was called shoofly because the sweet smell drew flies toward the table, and cooks had to shoo them away as the pie cooled. Families made it because molasses was cheaper and easier to store than sugar, making it the perfect holiday ingredient for households that had more hard work than money. The pie baked into a deep, gooey layer at the bottom with a crumbly cake-like topping on top, creating a texture that felt both rustic and indulgent. Children loved it because it was sweet enough to feel forbidden, and adults enjoyed it because every bite tasted like the land they came from. Over time, as refined sugar became cheap and store-bought pies took over, shoofly pie disappeared from most homes. It was too regional, too old-fashioned, too simple to compete with newer holiday desserts, but the people who remember it still talk about it with a quiet pride. It was a dessert that told a story, and every slice tasted a little like history. Baked pineapple casserole was the sweet surprise that appeared beside holiday hams, its tropical flavor providing brightness amid heavier winter fare. Canned pineapple chunks were combined with sugar, flour, and sharp cheddar cheese, a combination that sounded strange but tasted magnificent. The mixture was topped with buttery cracker crumbs and baked until bubbling and golden, cheese melting into strings that stretched with each serving. The dish straddled sweet and savory in ways that confused first-time tasters but converted them by second bite. Children loved its candy-like sweetness, while adults appreciated how pineapple's acid cut through rich ham. Some recipes added eggs for custard-like texture, while others kept it chunky. This casserole required minimal preparation but delivered maximum impact, making it a favorite of hostesses managing multiple dishes. Baked pineapple casserole represented the era's willingness to experiment. Proving strange pairings sometimes became beloved traditions. Pecan turtles were the candy that looked like their namesake, with pecan legs extending from caramel bodies topped with chocolate shells. Mothers arranged pecans in clusters on waxed paper, then spooned warm caramel over the centers, letting it flow between the nuts. Once the caramel set, each cluster was dipped in or drizzled with melted chocolate, creating the turtle's shell pattern. The combination of textures made turtles irresistible: crunchy pecans, chewy caramel, and smooth chocolate in every bite. Children loved helping arrange the pecan clusters, feeling like they were creating little candy creatures. The turtles required multiple steps and careful timing, as the caramel needed to be cool enough to hold shape, but warm enough to stick to the nuts. These candies were often saved for gift boxes and special occasions, their elaborate appearance making them feel more valuable than simpler confections. Pecan turtles proved that homemade candy could rival anything from expensive chocolate shops. Marzipan fruits were those tiny sculptured candies shaped and painted to look like miniature apples, pears, bananas, and oranges, displayed in boxes or arranged on dessert platters. The marzipan was made from ground almonds and sugar, kneaded until smooth and pliable enough to shape by hand. Food coloring was painted on with tiny brushes, building layers to create realistic shading, red blushing into yellow on apples, green stems on oranges. European confectioners had perfected this art over centuries, and American home cooks attempted simpler versions during the Christmas season. The candies were more decorative than practical, often too beautiful to eat. Children would admire them in candy shop windows, memorizing which fruits they would choose when finally allowed to pick. Marzipan fruits represented the artistic side of holiday baking, where flavor was secondary to appearance and the goal was creating miniature works of edible art. Texas sheet cake is renowned for its rich, fudgy icing and moist chocolate base, traditionally baked in a large, flat baking sheet. This cake is particularly noted for its method of pouring warm icing over the hot cake, allowing the icing to partially soak into the top layer of the cake, creating a uniquely moist texture. The traditional recipe uses everyday ingredients like flour, sugar, buttermilk, and cocoa. But the 1980s saw variations that included adding cinnamon or espresso powder to enhance the chocolate flavor. Additionally, the ease of preparation, often just mixing the wet and dry ingredients together, made it accessible for bakers of all skill levels. The cake's popularity was also supported by the widespread availability of high-quality cocoa powders and vanilla extracts, which were becoming more accessible and affordable. Divinity was that cloud-like confection appearing on Christmas cookie trays throughout the South and Midwest, a fluffy white candy that seemed to melt on the tongue before you could taste it. Making Divinity required perfect timing and dry weather. Humidity could turn a batch into sticky failure. Grandmothers would boil sugar syrup while beating egg whites to stiff peaks, then slowly pour the hot syrup into the whites while continuing to beat until the mixture held its shape. The candy was dropped by spoonfuls onto waxed paper, each piece a little cloud dotted with chopped pecans. Some families added peppermint extract for Christmas, tinting batches pale pink or green. The process demanded patience that couldn't be rushed, often taking 30 minutes of continuous beating. Children would hover nearby, waiting to lick the beaters clean. Divinity was fragile and didn't travel well, making it a true homemade treasure. The candy represented the time and care that went into Christmas preparations. Peppermint bark layered dark and white chocolate with crushed candy canes into a festive treat that looked as beautiful as it tasted. Mothers would melt semi-sweet chocolate and spread it thin on waxed paper, letting it set until firm before adding a layer of white chocolate on top. While the white chocolate was still soft, crushed peppermint candy canes were pressed into the surface, their red and white stripes creating holiday color against the creamy background. Once fully hardened, the bark was broken into irregular shards that showed off the distinct layers. Each bite delivered the snap of tempered chocolate followed by cool peppermint that lingered on the tongue. Children loved the contrast of textures and flavors, the way the candy cane pieces crunched against smooth chocolate. Making bark required patience for proper tempering, but rewarded cooks with a candy that looked professional and tasted even better. It became a staple of cookie exchanges and holiday gift boxes, a treat that said Christmas without any words needed. Three-bean salad appeared at nearly every holiday gathering throughout the 1970s, its colorful layers making it as beautiful as it was economical. Green beans, yellow wax beans, and kidney beans were drained from cans and combined with sliced onions and bell peppers in large glass bowls. A marinade of oil, vinegar, sugar, and spices was poured over everything. Then the salad rested overnight while flavors melded. The result was tangy and crisp, each bean variety offering different texture and color. What made three-bean salad practical was its cost. Canned beans were inexpensive, and the salad stretched to feed crowds without straining budgets. It traveled well, too, making it a potluck favorite that arrived looking good. The dish required no heating and could sit at room temperature through long gatherings. Three-bean salad proved that simple preparations from pantry staples could earn places on festive tables alongside more elaborate offerings. Plum pudding was a true old-world holdover, a dessert that lingered on some tables long after most American families moved on. Dense, dark, and deeply spiced, it was made from dried fruits soaked for days, steamed slowly, and served with a sauce rich enough to make the long wait worthwhile. To many families in the 1960s and 1970s, plum pudding tasted like heritage, a link to ancestors who carried their traditions across oceans. It was not a quick dessert, nor an easy one, and that was part of its charm. Holidays were slower then, and a dessert that took hours to steam felt like a fitting reward at the end of a long day. But modern kitchens lost the tools, time, and patience for steaming puddings, and the dessert quietly disappeared. Those who remember it recall the warm spice, the dense texture, and the sense of continuity it brought to the table. A reminder that holidays once held space for recipes older than memory. Syllabub in stemmed glasses was Christmas elegance whipped into frothy perfection. This ancient English dessert combined cream, sugar, and wine or sherry, beaten until it formed soft peaks that held their shape in delicate glasses. The mixture separated slowly, the creamy foam floating above a pool of flavored liquid that guests sipped after finishing the top. Families served syllabub at the end of Christmas dinner, the light texture providing relief after heavy courses. Making it required vigorous whisking by hand, often delegated to daughters learning domestic arts. The wine needed careful selection. Too sweet and the dessert became cloying, too dry and it lacked charm. Some versions incorporated lemon juice for brightness, cutting through the richness with citrus tang. The dessert looked ethereal in crystal glasses, catching candlelight and trembling with each movement. Syllabub disappeared as electric mixers made whipped cream commonplace and the patience for hand whisking vanished. It was celebration in a glass. Sweet potato custard was the quiet soul of Thanksgiving long before sweet potato pie stole the spotlight, a silky baked dish that tasted like home even in uncertain years. Families loved it because it was simple and comforting, made with sweet potatoes, milk, spices, and a steady hand. It came from an older style of cooking that relied on patience rather than tools. When it came from the oven, lightly set and fragrant, its sweetness came from the vegetable itself instead of handfuls of sugar. Adults swore it softened even the hardest winters, but as shortcuts and store-bought pies took over, the custard was pushed aside as too plain or old-fashioned. People forgot that its simplicity was exactly its charm. No crust, no excess, just a warm, velvety dessert that felt like a hug on a cold evening. Today it appears mostly in memories and fading recipe cards, but reviving it once is enough to understand why it mattered. Creamed celery was the sophisticated cousin of other creamed vegetables, turning the overlooked stalk into something worthy of fine china and silver spoons. Cooks sliced celery on the diagonal and simmered it until tender, then folded it into rich white sauce enriched with cream and butter. Seasonings were delicate: white pepper, a touch of nutmeg, perhaps parsley for color. The celery retained gentle crunch even in the sauce, providing textural interest other creamed vegetables lacked. This was a dish for formal dinners and holiday gatherings, its mild elegance complementing rather than competing with richer offerings. Pale green and white colors added sophistication to tables heavy with browns. Some cooks topped creamed celery with toasted almonds, creating a gratin that bordered on indulgent. The dish required fresh celery at its crispest, making winter holidays the perfect occasion. Creamed celery has virtually disappeared from modern menus, a casualty of changing tastes that forgot how refined simple vegetables could become. Maple cream candy was the New England specialty that spread across America as families moved and carried recipes with them. Pure maple syrup was boiled to soft ball stage, then cooled and stirred vigorously until it transformed from glossy liquid to opaque, creamy solid. The stirring required patience and arm strength, as the maple crystallized slowly over many minutes of constant motion. Poured into molds or spread in pans and cut into squares, the candy had a texture somewhere between fudge and butter, melting instantly on the tongue. The flavor was pure concentrated maple, intensely sweet with that distinctive woodsy undertone that only real maple syrup provides. Children who grew up with maple cream candy considered it the finest sweet they'd ever tasted, nothing else quite matching its smooth richness. For families with New England roots, these candies connected Christmas to sugaring season and generations of tradition. Maple cream represented regional identity preserved through decades of December candy making. Tutti Frutti candy was that rainbow-colored confection made by preserving fruits in brandy throughout the year. Each season's harvest added to a crock that became Christmas treasure. The process began in spring with strawberries, continued through summer with cherries and peaches, and finished in fall with pears and grapes, each addition accompanied by sugar and spirits. The crock sat in a cool place, occasionally stirred, the fruit slowly breaking down into jeweled conserve tasting of concentrated summer. At Christmas, the Tutti Frutti was spooned over ice cream, pound cake, or eaten straight as a boozy treat for adults. Some families kept their crocks going for years, the flavor deepening with each passing season. The tradition required forethought that modern cooks rarely possess, remembering to add each fruit at its peak, maintaining proper ratios. Tutti Frutti represented the old way of cooking when preparing for Christmas began in spring, and patience was an essential ingredient. Baked Alaska, once the pinnacle of dining elegance with its combination of cake, ice cream, and meringue, has faded in popularity due to its perceived complexity and the rise of simpler, more accessible desserts. The challenge of perfectly executing the meringue and achieving the flambé effect can be daunting for home bakers, contributing to its decline. Additionally, in a culinary landscape that values quick and straightforward recipes, Baked Alaska's time-consuming preparation makes it less appealing for everyday dessert choices. However, its dramatic presentation and the contrast of hot and cold elements retain a potential allure, suggesting that deconstructed or simplified versions could bring it back into favor for special occasions, flour and eggs, and sometimes jazzed up with lemon or vanilla. Depending on where you're at, they might toss in some dried fruits or nuts. In the southern US, they're more like soft, sweet cookies and aren't fancy at all. They became a staple because they're easy to make and just the thing for munching during a tea break or as a light dessert. Interestingly, variations of tea cakes can be found globally, with each region adding its local twist to the basic recipe. Normally, they're baked up small and round and dusted with a bit of powdered sugar. They're all about being understated but delicious, perfect for those moments when you want something sweet without making a big deal about it. Hawaiian Delight is all about those tropical vibes. Hard sauce was the essential accompaniment to steamed puddings, a simple mixture of butter, powdered sugar, and brandy beaten until light and fluffy, then chilled until firm. The name was misleading. Hard sauce wasn't a sauce at all, but a flavored butter that melted into silky pools when spooned onto warm pudding. Making it required beating butter until nearly white, gradually incorporating sugar and spirits until the mixture could be piped into decorative shapes. Some families added nutmeg or vanilla, others used rum or whiskey instead of brandy, each household developing their signature version. The sauce was made ahead and refrigerated, sometimes for weeks, allowing flavors to meld. At the Christmas table, hard sauce was presented in a pretty dish with its own small spoon, passed around for each guest. Children often found the brandy too strong, but adults savored how cold butter melted against hot pudding. Without hard sauce, steamed pudding was incomplete. yet today few cooks know this classic even exists. Coconut haystacks were the quick confection that mothers could make even on the busiest December days, requiring nothing more than melted chocolate and shredded coconut. Butterscotch or chocolate chips were melted carefully, then stirred with sweetened coconut until every strand was coated. Dropped by spoonfuls onto waxed paper, the haystacks set into rough mounds that looked exactly like their farmyard namesakes. Children could help make these, stirring the mixture and dropping candies, learning basics without hot sugar dangers. The texture combined the snap of set chocolate with the chew of coconut, each bite delivering both crunch and softness. Some mothers added chopped nuts or used white chocolate, while others stuck with the classic their own mothers had made. Haystacks were democratic candy, easy enough for beginners, yet beloved enough that skilled candy makers included them on holiday plates. They disappeared quickly at gatherings, their simplicity making them more rather than less appealing. Glorified rice transformed leftover grain into a festive dessert salad that children begged for and adults secretly loved just as much. Cold-cooked rice was folded with crushed pineapple, miniature marshmallows, maraschino cherries, and whipped cream until it became unrecognizable from its humble origins. Some versions added chopped nuts or coconut for texture, while others kept the base simple. The dish needed thorough chilling, allowing flavors to meld and rice to soften in the creamy mixture. Served in crystal bowls, glorified rice looked almost bridal, pale and dotted with bright cherry red. The sweetness made it controversial as a side dish, yet families insisted it belonged alongside turkey and gravy. This was thrift elevated to celebration, using rice that might otherwise go to waste. Mothers passed down specific ratios, each family believing their version superior. Glorified rice represented an era when creativity with basics was celebrated, when making something from nothing was its own form of kitchen magic. Grape hull pie was a hidden southern treasure, made from muscadine grapes that grew thick on backyard vines and roadside fences. Families who knew this pie understood the work behind it, separating the tough skins from the pulp, simmering the insides until soft, chopping the hulls, then marrying everything back together with sugar and spice. The result was a filling with a deep purple color and a flavor both tart and sweet, richer than any store-bought fruit could ever give. This pie showed up on Thanksgiving tables in rural communities where ingredients came from the land and every harvest was celebrated. It tasted like home, like the sun-baked vines children grew up running past, like the work of hands that valued nothing more than using what you had. But as people moved away from the countryside and muscadine stopped appearing in local markets, grape hull pie nearly vanished. Few recipes survived, passed down only in small handwritten notes tucked inside old cookbooks. A dessert almost forgotten, but unforgettable to anyone lucky enough to have tasted it. Indian pudding steamed for hours brought colonial tradition to New England Christmas tables. This dense cornmeal pudding combined Native American ingredients with English technique, creating something uniquely American. Cornmeal was cooked slowly with milk, molasses, ginger, and cinnamon until it thickened into a mass that baked low and slow for hours. The result was dark, sticky, and intensely flavored, with edges that caramelized against the baking dish. Families served it warm with cold cream or vanilla ice cream, the temperature contrast heightening sensation. The molasses provided depth that sugar could never match, mineral and earthy alongside sweet. Making Indian pudding required time modern schedules rarely allow, the long baking transforming simple ingredients through patience. Children often found it too intense, its dark color and strong flavor challenging young palates. Indian pudding connected Christmas tables to America's earliest culinary traditions. Its rarity marks a severed connection to colonial heritage. The seven-layer cake, or rainbow cake, impresses with its vibrant, multicolored appearance. Each of the 7 thin sponge layers dyed a different color and separated by a thin layer of chocolate or jam. Originating from Europe, this cake became popular in American bakeries, especially within Eastern European immigrant communities. The cake's preparation is meticulous, involving the precise measurement and coloring of batter for each layer. followed by careful baking to ensure each layer remains uniformly thin and moist. The 1980s saw advancements in food dye quality, which offered brighter, more fade-resistant colors, making the layers visually striking without affecting the flavor. The fillings between the layers also evolved during this time, with variations including apricot, raspberry, and even mint jams becoming popular. The pineapple upside-down cake, a marvel of sweetness and texture, charmed its way into hearts with its caramelized pineapple topping and moist cake base. However, as dessert trends moved towards more sophisticated and less sugary options, this cake's presence dwindled. The move away from canned fruit and processed ingredients, which are central to the classic version of this cake, in favor of fresh, less processed alternatives, also contributed to its decline. Moreover, the advent of foodie culture, which prioritizes novel and Instagram-worthy desserts, left the more traditional and less visually dynamic pineapple upside-down cake behind. Despite this, it remains a cherished reminder of past baking traditions, holding potential for revival with updated, healthier ingredients. Poke cake hit the scene in the 70s and got everyone excited because you could do so much with it. After baking a simple vanilla or chocolate cake, you poke holes all over it and fill those up with Jell-O, pudding, or sweetened condensed milk. This trick lets the filling soak into the cake, making it super moist and adding layers of flavor. Jell-O pushed this idea big time, showing everyone how a plain cake could turn into a showstopper. It was a hit because you could tweak it with different fillings depending on what you were into. But as tastes got more sophisticated and folks leaned towards less sugary stuff, poke cake kind of lost its spotlight. It was usually served in a big dish, looking casual and family-friendly. You'd often see it with a fluffy layer of whipped cream on top, maybe some fruit or sprinkles too, just to make those flavors pop. Butterscotch brownies, or blondies, mix it up with candied citrus peel, was the jewel-like garnish decorating Christmas cakes and cookies. Strips of orange, lemon, and grapefruit rind transformed through days of simmering into translucent, sugar-crusted confections. The process began by scoring citrus rinds and soaking them in water for days, changing the water repeatedly to remove bitterness. Then came slow simmering in increasingly concentrated sugar syrups, the peels gradually absorbing sweetness while maintaining their shape. The final step was drying, either air-dried on racks or rolled in granulated sugar for a crystalline coating. The finished peels could be dipped in chocolate, chopped into fruitcakes, or eaten as candy, each piece a concentrated burst of citrus tempered by sweetness. During the 1960s, no Christmas fruitcake was complete without homemade candied peel, making it required unhurried time that Christmas preparations once demanded, days of attention and watching the transformation happen. The peels kept for months, allowing cooks to prepare them well in advance. Candied orange peel transformed citrus scraps into jewel-like confections that looked almost too pretty to eat but tasted too good to resist. Mothers sliced orange peels into strips, boiled them repeatedly to remove bitterness, then simmered them in sugar syrup until translucent. Drained and tossed in granulated sugar, the peels sparkled like amber gems, their texture chewy and intensely flavored. Some mothers dipped theirs in dark chocolate, the bitter cocoa complementing sweet citrus perfectly. The candy took days to make properly, requiring multiple blanching sessions, but results were unlike anything from stores. Children were often surprised by how much they loved candied peel, expecting bitterness and finding instead concentrated orange sunshine. Arranged on plates alongside other candies, the peels added color and sophistication that elevated the entire spread. This was the candy that showed a mother's dedication, her willingness to transform what others discarded into something beautiful. Scalloped oysters were a Christmas tradition in coastal communities where briny bivalves signified celebration and abundance. Layers of shucked oysters nestled between buttery cracker crumbs in shallow baking dishes, each layer doused with oyster liquor, cream, and butter. Seasonings were simple: salt, pepper, and Worcestershire sauce to enhance oceanic flavor. The casserole baked until tops turned golden while oysters beneath plumped and released juices into the cream. The result was rich and delicate, soft oysters against crunchy cracker layers. For families with New England or Southern roots, this dish carried generations of memory, appearing on holiday tables reliably as the tree itself. Children often developed their taste for oysters through this dish, familiar crackers making unusual protein approachable. The smell alone announced Christmas had arrived. Though fresh oysters remain available, scalloped oysters have largely faded, remembered now mainly by elders who associate the dish with their finest holiday memories. Hummingbird cake was once a Thanksgiving showstopper, a towering southern dessert packed with banana, pineapple, and toasted nuts that made the whole room go quiet with the first slice. It tasted like sunshine and warmth even on the coldest holiday morning. Families made it because it felt generous, full of ingredients you saved for special occasions. The batter was thick and fragrant, spiced just enough to feel festive, and the cream cheese frosting wrapped everything in a soft, tangy sweetness. Every layer tasted like celebration. For years, it stood proudly among pies on Thanksgiving buffets, especially in the Deep South, where hospitality meant feeding people with your best. Over time, though, it slipped into birthday parties and spring gatherings instead, pushed aside by pumpkin pies and chocolate desserts that dominated holiday tables. But those who grew up with hummingbird cake remember the joy of cutting into it, the way the fruit kept it moist for days, and how it felt like the dessert that understood the holiday best, abundant, warm, and made to share. A sweet memory worth keeping alive. Which forgotten Christmas cookie would you revive in your own kitchen? Share your memories in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more treasured recipes from the past.